Okay, so when you hear the words true crime, your brain probably jumps straight to the usual suspects, right? Robbery, murder, or, I don't know, a high-stakes art heist. But frankly, that's a little boring. Today, we're bypassing all of the standard stuff to look at a far more esoteric agricultural true crime story. It's a crazy tale of federal bureaucracy, outright defiance, and breakfast food. We're talking about the Great Raisin Rebellion.
Picture this. You spend months growing a crop. You harvest it with your own two hands, and then a government agent shows up and tells you that keeping 54% or more of your own personal harvest is literally a federal offense. Well, back in the year 2002, that was exactly the case. Now these days, if you're a California grape farmer, you can sell as many of your raisins to whomever you like. But up until 2015, the government was legally allowed to seize a massive annual cut of a farmer's crop.
So how in the world did this bizarre scenario even come to be? Why on earth was selling your own raisins a federal crime? Well, to answer that, we've got to unpack a truly strange chain of events involving the Magna Carta, a real-life private investigator named Rocky Pipkin, and a very, very grumpy farmer named Marvin Horn.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, the motive, a post-war crash.
To figure out the motive here, we have to look at why the U.S. government even kept a raisin reserve to begin with. Step 1 on our timeline takes us back to World War II. This was an absolute baller time for the U.S. agricultural economy. The government was buying up literal tons of raisins to ship over to Europe as troop snacks. But then we hit Step 2. The war ends, and demand absolutely plummets. Then in Step 3, European farms start recovering from all that wartime devastation. So suddenly, these California grape farmers, who had been riding super high on those sweet government contracts, are facing massive new competition and way fewer customers.
And the fallout was devastating. Just to put this into perspective, by 1949, the price of raisins had crashed 60% in just 3 short years. The market was in an absolute freefall, and these farmers were staring down total financial ruin.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Operation Bureaucratic Heist.
So, to fix this, back during the New Deal, Congress passed the Agricultural Marketing Agreement Act of 1937. This gave the government sweeping powers to step in and stabilize markets by creating crop reserves. Now, the logistics of this were honestly kind of wild. Every single year, a group known as the Raisin Administrative Committee would look at the harvest and dictate exactly what portion every grower had to hand over to the reserve. Next, the Department of Agriculture would physically seize that cut, artificially reducing the U.S. supply just to keep market prices high. They disposed of these extra raisins in quote-unquote non-competitive ways. Think exporting them, donating them to schools, or, and I'm not making this up, literally mixing them into animal feed. Any money these reserve raisins happened to make was supposed to eventually go back to the farmers, but, and this is a big but, only after the government paid off its own administrative costs, meaning farmers were often left with pennies, or sometimes absolutely nothing at all.
Fast forward to the 2002 to 2003 growing season. The committee decided the reserve cut needed to be a staggering 47%. Almost half of a farmer's hard-earned crop was demanded for seizure. And honestly, this massive demand became the ultimate breaking point for our prime suspect.
Enter Section 3, the suspect and the sting.
Meet Marvin Horn. He's the raisin farmer who finally just snapped. When Uncle Sam's truck showed up to pick up that 47% cut, Marv flat out turned them away. He completely refused. Now, while all the compliant farmers were dutifully sacrificing half their harvest, Horn was out there defying the government and selling 100% of his crop at high market prices. You can see exactly why his peers were furious, right? Horn was profiting off a high price point that literally only existed because everyone else was following the rules and restricting the supply.
But the other growers didn't just complain. They got so suspicious and honestly so angry that they actually hired a real-life private investigator named Rocky Pipkin. Yep, they paid him to secretly videotape Horn's farm to catch him red-handed keeping his own raisins. It's just an incredible image, isn't it? A private eye doing covert surveillance on a grape farm.
Well, the sting operation totally worked. The government stepped in and slapped Horn with a massive financial penalty for his defiance. We're talking $695,226. But Horn, he didn't back down. Instead, he sued the federal government, kicking off a decade-long lawsuit claiming that this entire reserve system was unconstitutional.
Which sets up our finale in Section 4, the verdict, death of a vampire policy.
In 2015, this epic legal battle finally culminated at the Supreme Court. In a massive 8-1 decision, the court ruled decisively in favor of Marvin Horn. With this near-unanimous vote, they effectively ended the Raisin Reserve for good. They drove a stake right through the heart of the policy. The court found that the reserve rules violated the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which explicitly states, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the opinion, and he actually noted that this core protection of private property traces its roots all the way back to the Magna Carta. The government tried to argue that the vague promise a farmer might get some pennies back later counted as compensation, but the Supreme Court flatly disagreed. They basically said, look, a promise doesn't count as paying for the raisins you are literally carting away.
Now, the funny thing about this massive Supreme Court showdown is that the Raisin Reserve was actually all but dead before the court even killed it. Practically speaking, the committee hadn't actually taken a reserve cut since 2009. Why? Because market forces had already won out. Farmers were so sick of the bureaucracy that they had simply started switching to more valuable non-reserve crops, things like citrus and almonds. Ultimately, this ruling was less about destroying a thriving reserve, and way more about ensuring this vampire policy could never return from the dead to haunt farmers again. Now California grape growers can sell every single one of their raisins.
So, quick question for you. Want to learn how to solve complex problems and master logical thinking without dealing with crushing bureaucracy or, getting secretly videotaped by a private investigator named Rocky Pipkin?
Then you've absolutely got to check out our sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is the absolute best way to learn math, logic, and computer science. Whether you're just trying to brush up on your foundational math skills or you want to learn Python. Actually, scratch that. You can't use Python to communicate with real snakes, but you get the idea. Brilliant's interactive visual lessons make complex topics actually click. You learn by doing, not just watching. Head over to the link in the description to get 20% off an annual premium subscription and unlock your inner math person today.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. But before we go, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. If the government could legally seize 47% of a private citizen's harvest for over half a century just to stabilize prices, what other esoteric, outdated vampire policies are still lurking in the shadows of our legal system today? It really makes you wonder what other bizarre rules are just sitting there, waiting for a grumpy citizen to finally say no. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and keep questioning the rules.